Okay, we are recording now. I just wanted to. This is a unit on typography, and I'm going to, here on my other screen, share the screen with you so that you can see the this little intro, this fun little intro to typography, and it gives you a little bit of the history. So let's take a look at this right now.
Type is power. The power to express words and ideas visually. It's timeless, but always changing. That's what we're going to explore. Most people agree that the creator of typography was a German man named Johannes Gutenberg. Yes, he wore a hat like that. Before Gutenberg came along and revolutionized the world of communication, books needed to be scribed by hand, usually by monks, which was very time-consuming and expensive. So Gutenberg created blackletter, the first ever typeface modeled after the writing of the scribes. Blackletter has thick vertical lines and thin horizontal connectors, which made it great for scribing, but it looked very dense and squished together when printed. Something needed to change. Enter Roman type. This particular typeface is Cambrian, which you're probably used to seeing on your word processor. But the first ever Roman typeface was created in the 15th century by the Frenchman Nicolas Jenson. This is his typeface right here. Jenson worked mainly in Venice, Italy, and was inspired by the lettering found on ancient Roman buildings. Its letter forms were based on straight lines and regular curves. This made them very clear and legible compared to the dense darkness of black letter. This legible new typeface was an instant success, quickly spread across Europe, riding on the coattails of the Renaissance. The next major innovation in typography after Roman letters was italics, which are like slanted and stylized versions of Roman type. They were created in the late 15th century by Aldus Manutius from Italy as a way of fitting more letters onto the page and saving money. Now we use italics interspersed in Roman type for emphasis. Aldus Manutius also created modern comma and semicolon, but that's another story. Type development stayed fairly stagnant until the 18th century in England, when William Caslon created a typeface that set a new standard for legibility. Well, it wasn't anything radical, it was just what the world was looking for. The style of Caslon's typeface is now referred to as old style. A few decades later, another Brit named John Baskerville created a new variety of typeface, which we call transitional. Later still, a Frenchman named Didot and an Italian named Bodoni created typefaces that we have classified as modern. Most serif typefaces fit into one of these three categories, but what does each category mean? An old-style typeface has letters that have thick serifs and low contrast between thick and thin strokes. A transitional typeface has letters with thinner serifs and a higher contrast between thick and thin strokes. And a modern typeface has letters with very thin serifs and extreme contrast between thick and thin strokes. Next, William Caslon's great-grandson, named William Caslon IV, got sick of all of these serifs, so he decided to remove them entirely and made a new kind of typeface called the sans serif. It didn't catch on immediately, but would eventually get really big. During the Second Industrial Revolution, advertising created a need for new typefaces. Letters were made taller and wider, mainly used in large sizes on posters and billboards. Things got pretty weird, but one happy result of all of this experimentation is Egyptian, or slab serif. It has really thick serifs and is usually used for titles. As a backlash to the complexity found in typefaces of the 19th century, the early 20th century brought something simple. Paul Renner from Germany created a typeface called Futura that was based on simple geometric shapes. This is called the geometric sans. Around the same time, a British man, Eric Gill, created a typeface called Gill Sans that was similar to the geometric sans, but with gentler, more natural curves, and this is called the humanist sans. The next major step in the world of sans serifs happened in Switzerland in 1957, the introduction of Helvetica. It has simple curves and is available in many different ways, and some would call it the world's favorite typeface. The world of typography changed forever with the introduction of the computer. There were a few difficult years of crude pixel type due to the primitive screen technology. But then technology evolved and computers began to allow for the creation of thousands of beautiful typefaces and the odd done. But now anyone has the freedom to create their own unique typeface. And that is the history of typography.
Okay. There we go. I think you're hearing my cat here. You may be hearing my cat here whining at me. She's also biting me, which is what she does to get attention. She'll bite me. There, that's her. That's her over there. So we're going to start with the unit on typography. Let me go back to share my PowerPoints with you. There we go. And start. Okay. So this is the unit on typography, and if you look at this cartoon's sort of humorous in the fact that yes, typography, the type of type that we choose for various applications does affect our perception of things, and of course vice versa. You know, if a typeface doesn't seem to fit, we sometimes notice it. Of course, we would expect something much more flowery, much more interesting and intricate for to be the typeface for heaven. And so that's an interesting take on it anyhow. Let's see. So let's see, how do I go? I guess I got to do it over here. There we go. All right. So and believe it or not, there are typography jokes. So, and you're hearing my cat play in the background, unfortunately. We're going to look at this little video here about typography, and I'm going to have to make another change here.
It's not just what you say, but how you say it. We do that with typefaces, with fonts. They've been called the voice of the page. Typefaces are to the written word what different dialects are to different languages. Different typefaces have different sensibilities, different traits, different characteristics. Stephen Heller is the author of more than 90 books on typography and graphic design. Type it's so much a part of our daily life that it's invisible, yet quite visible. Seen and unseen, the world of type all around us began with one of history's greatest inventions, the Gutenberg movable type printing press in the 15th century. Typographers chose the lettering of ancient Rome as their model for what an ideal printed letter should look like. Since then, the look of a typeface depends in part on what it needs to do.
This tiny, tiny type is some of the most demanding stuff in a newspaper.
Jonathan Heffler is a typographer whose firm redesigned the font for the Wall Street Journal's stock listings. The task: fit more information on a page.
It's getting a lot narrower and a lot smaller.
He and his partner, Tobias Frere Jones, know all about the microscopic science of how the eye reads letters on a page. That an O, for example, must be slightly higher than an H to look right. They've designed typefaces for dozens of major magazines and can also tell you all about the art of the other big purpose of type, delivering impact and emotion. Take their typeface for People magazine.
It has the kind of brash feeling that most headline fonts have in magazines in this market, but without being intimidating.
Heffler says they achieve this effect by designing tall, lowercase letters, which have a friendly feel. But typefaces don't just communicate tone, they're also about identity. Every company wants to have an identity, and type is one of the ways of doing that. Logo fonts change slowly, but everywhere else, it seems change is the rule. the interesting thing about type is that every generation, and maybe every year, there is a type that kind of defines that moment. We now look at a face called Broadway and say that's typically 20s. In the 30s, they used these wonderful scripts called perfume types. Psychedelic type. You look at it now, and what do you say? You say the 60s. You say rock and roll.
What about today? The digital revolution and the rise of the home computer play a big part in that answer.
Anybody can play with type. In their basic computer, they may have anywhere from 30 to 500 typefaces to choose from.
Is there a font of our time? I think the font of our time is all fonts. I think it's the range of possibilities that is available.
And you can say that any way you like.
Okay. All right, let's go back to, let's stop sharing here for just a second. So there are a couple of videos there about typography. Now back to the slides. There we go. So typography. Typography is the art of selecting and arranging type using various graphic designs to obtain a particular effect. And it also refers to the actual reproduction of the words through a mechanical process. So you kind of, you kind of have the artistic aspect of it here, and you have the more technical aspect of it there. So that's the, okay, well, this problem again. I don't know why it does this. Anyway, so let's talk about text a little bit. When you use text, words are actually graphic elements. They're not just the words. They are pictorial. They have certain emotional qualities. And when people select type, they look at things like readability, the attitudes of and ideas that they're trying to portray, and also the overall tone, say, of a publication like a magazine. You look at the Vogue ad here, and you will see that you have the Vogue masthead, which is basically the logo for the ad, but it tells you the name of the magazine. And Vogue has done such a good job of establishing its identity that they can afford to have the photo of the model that's sort of intertwined in the letters themselves. And if you look at this, then beyond that, you see really only a couple of typefaces on a page. Normally, you do not do, a large number of typefaces on a page because it gets kind of confusing looking, and it looks jumbled in essence. Vogue here is using a sans serif face, which is this word, the word couples here, or the couples issue here, and then it intersperses that with some more of this this transitional, or I'm sorry, this is actually the more modern Roman typeface with the very thin serifs. Remember that first video that we looked at, and it shows you. So that, and then this picks it up, although it's italicized, in other words, slanted. They're using that same, the Vogue typeface. But notice there's really only two typefaces all the way through. So normally on a page, it's usually, it's sort of a rule of thumb, and you'll notice it on a pretty regular basis, that advertisements and even magazine stories, at most will use two typefaces, one for kind of the headlines and emphasis perhaps, and then the other for the full text. Some types of type do not read well when you're trying to have long passages of text, like in a magazine article. Say and I would say that maybe even the type here, that is this Roman type that says Vogue, might not be the best thing to use for text, for long text passages. But let's go back. The earliest writing really was painting, making pictures on cave walls. and on bones and things like that. And these are things that have been excavated. These are some pictures of, on the left especially, of some cave, probably the oldest cave paintings that we're aware of, although I think maybe recently they found some that are a little bit older. These particular ones were found in France, and they depict apparently, some animals, and possibly this is a hunt. And it's a way of communicating information. And so these are some of the earliest known drawings. And on the right, you have some kind of a scratched painting scratched into rock. So this was, people used early on, used the materials that were available to them in order to create images or stories in image stories. And this is really where writing began. Um, Petroglyphs are the ones that we just noticed, on the previous slide, are the rock drawings. These are drawings made in rock, and they've been discovered, and they are fairly permanent in many cases. And so these are some primitive early rock drawings. Another set of these. There you go again. And this might be what? A fish? It might be some method of counting. There's a number of, when people have looked at this in my classes and have, speculated what it might be. It does have the appearance maybe of the bones of a fish, perhaps, or an animal. But it also might be the kind of thing where someone's, measuring days or measuring something, against something else. So. Here's some early paintings. Pictographs are a specific type of painting or drawing in which the pictures stand for objects, plants, or animals, that kind of thing. So you see, and these are you have upper right, you have pictures of some antelope of some kind, rather fat antelope, but the antelope just the same. And down at the lower part, you have pictures of, of a bird picking up a man. I mean, there's a lot of different things there. Some of these are sort of fantastical pictures. You can imagine early people drawing something like that and then laughing that it was, perhaps, kind of outlandish. But these are pictures that stand for objects, and animals and people and whatever. Here's a picture of this is looks like it might be an early Native American drawing. There's some Native American art, pictographs on skin on the left, on an animal skin. Okay. Ideographs are images that represent abstract ideas or that represent language. And you look at this picture on the bottom, you see sort of, you have kind of a combination pictograph and ideograph, but those little swirly piece drawings that appear to be emanating from their mouths indicate that these people are, I believe it's either they're speaking or something else, or they're thinking. And it's sort of an early form of what we came to know as the symbolism in cartoons, I guess. And that is, but it represents an abstract idea. You look at the images on the right, and that you've got Japanese drawing that, is representing an abstract idea. Bottom right is an ideograph that represents house. It does look a little like a house, like an iconic kind of thing, but it really represents the idea of a house. So you can really read that as meaning, having some meaning that relates to a house. So it's an ideograph. This is a picture dictionary, so to speak, of Native American symbolism. Native Americans didn't have as much of a written language as the Europeans did, by far, but they did have some symbolism and some writing of this kind of type. in Japanese, they're talking about this is a symbol for dust, and it combines two other symbols with small. I'm sorry, small and earth, and it and which is essentially small pieces of earth, which mean dust. So it's a combination of symbols. Um, as I said before, people early on used the materials that were available to them readily. This is some writing that is done on a tortoise shell. Over here, clay tablets. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But that is there's writing on a clay tablet. So the earliest writing that we are aware of that would be really we would think of as writing was done by the Sumerians, and they used a clay tablet with a stylus, with a kind of a specially shaped stick, essentially, and it was called cuneiform, which refers to the sort of triangular shape of all the symbols and all the marks that are made here. And they would use sort of semi dried clay, write in it, use, it was still soft, while it was still soft, and then it would be, and when it hardened, then there was a kind of a permanent record then. The problem, of course, with this is that it was very heavy, but again, they were using local materials. So, a cuneiform tablet is not something that you probably carried around a lot, but it was made available. It usually stayed in one place. Was not unlike paper. You get to the Egyptians, and they developed something called hieroglyphics, which was we call writing of the gods. But they used papyrus reeds. They put reeds together, and it was a much more. In fact, the word paper comes from the word papyrus, and they didn't use clay. They used papyrus, which was more portable, could be put into scrolls, things like that. They had and they really had three different sort of what they call scripts, three different ways of writing: pictographs, ideographs, and determinatives. Okay, and so they made use of these things. When you talk about determinatives, that is a symbol that denotes if something is vocalized, like a sound. A specific sound would be indicated by a particular symbol. They had two different. I'm sorry, not they had two different scripts, not three. The scripts were the Demotic script, which is the business and religious symbols, and it was sort of the high language. In other words, the more sophisticated language. And then there was the hieratic script, which was for everyday usage. So, two different scripts. They made use of pictographs, ideographs, and determinatives, which were things that made the sounds, and they used papyrus. And this is something that was sort of lost to us for a long time, because until they basically opened up some of the tombs and started actually exploring, and once they they had to figure out what this hieroglyphics meant, because it was very, very hard to understand. A small joke here to absorb that. But as I said, it was very hard to. People didn't really understand the hieroglyphics very well, because the record of it had kind of gone away. It was buried in the sands of the desert, and they came up with the third script was the ancient Egyptian then, and they had well, there were three scripts on this Rosetta Stone. I'm, uh, I hope I'm not confusing you. There were three. The Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799, and this had the same thing written in three different languages or three different scripts. It had it in the ancient Egyptian, the Demotic Egyptian, which is that um, high language for religion and business, and then it also had Greek. Well, when the people who discovered this, they knew Greek. Greek had survived as a actual language, and so by being able to compare these three different scripts, which said the same thing in different languages, they were able to start making headway into figuring out what the hieroglyphics meant and how the ancient Egyptian language was structured. This really led to a huge growth in Egyptology. It was very popular. If you look at, you look at, and really it was popular for a very, very long time. Right up into the 20th century, and when you saw, the opening of King Tut's tomb and things like that. But this was the beginning of all of that when they finally were able to crack the ancient Egyptian language. Chinese has 44,000 symbols. They've actually pared it down to about 1,000. It was, with 44,000 symbols, it was the sort of language that you would have to study for years. So only the very learned were able to actually make sense of it. It used what they called logograms, which were a sort of pictogram that represented a word. Okay, so it didn't always. It was, so that's a kind of a logogram. It was like an example of a logogram is the percent symbol that we use. And when we read it, we say percent. That's what it means. It doesn't mean, it does have a slight relationship to the number 100, I guess, but it's not, if you look at it, but it really is more of a logogram because you couldn't get you can't read the word percent in the actual symbol itself. You have to just know it, okay? Like a lot of other symbols. For Chinese, the spoken and written languages are not the same. So the written language is largely for reading, obviously. Sorry, for some reason when I do this on my computer at home, it wants to back up every once in a while, and I'm not doing that on purpose, but it does that. So, all right, there we go. The Phoenicians were the first ones to have an actual alphabet, and this was important because then you had a set of letters, and you can see that some of these are similar to our modern alphabet. But it was the first time that they had that where the letters themselves were indicative of specific sounds, so that then the spoken and the written languages could be very, very similar, and you could make any word out of the alphabet that was available. So and you could even make words that perhaps your reader didn't know the meaning of, which means that there could be a growth, really could be a growth in language. You could create new words, and you would still have an alphabet to express them. In the dark Middle Ages and medieval Europe, there were scribes. These were monks who would take manuscripts and hand copy them. So there was no printing. So all books were basically hand done. And of course, there were some disadvantages to this. And one of them was, that mistakes could be made. Every copy of a book, they were not perfect copies, so it was possible to make mistakes. It was also extremely time consuming, so each book took an immense number of hours to copy. And the problem, there were a lot of problems there, so it made books very expensive. The early books and in books in the medieval times, during the Dark Ages especially, books were not available to anyone but the church and to the royalty. So it was very unusual. Many kings and people in the royalty probably didn't even read. They depended on their religious people, their learned men, to read for them. Calligraphy was what the monks used, and it's sort of done as a hobby now. You can go to You can go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby. You can pick up a calligraphy kit if you want to do your own calligraphy. But it's called Beautiful Writing. It's hand lettering and what we call mark making. There's special marks, and you can see some of the little flourishes and things like that that are on the lettering to the lower right there. And this is today you only see calligraphy for things like certificates, honorary, honor, you know honorary certificates of certain kinds, maybe wedding invitations and things like that. So it's not done. It's not in general use now. You'll see it. There are typefaces that look very much like calligraphy, and you can use that, but it's hard to read, and so it's not particularly easy to read. The other thing you should notice here is that this calligraphy looks a lot like a typeface that we used to call Old English, and I think you still can get it as Old English. And that was very often used as the masthead for newspapers. Not so much anymore. If you look at, if you live in Elkhart and you look at the Elkhart Truth still has that, kind of a modernized version, but it's Old English. South Bend Tribune used to have an Old English masthead. Chicago Trib, same way. And so, and it was just sort of meant to look very high class or something like that, I guess. But that was part of it, or meant to mean that the newspapers text was maybe a little ageless. I don't know. Anyway, so that's Old English. So there's a number of different eras in typography. First one was what we call the pre-Gutenberg era, and it was where the words and the images were linked, where you had words and images together to a great degree. By the time Gutenberg came along, then you have the Gutenberg era, which was the 15th to the 18th century, and this was kind of a golden age of growth for printing and publishing, and words became the primary means of communication. They didn't depend so much on illustration. They were still used. It's not that they weren't, but there was because of the invention of the printing press, words became primary means of communication, and printing became, really was a huge boon. If you think about things like the Industrial Revolution, and you think about things like the change in the from old style communications to the use of computers, the invention of hot type, or the invention of the movable type printing press was truly revolutionary in a huge way. It changed the world, and so it really can't be underestimated. So in 1440, Gutenberg came along and invented a press with movable type. That meant that each letter was placed individually, and then when you were done printing a full page, you could come back and you could create a whole different page. And so you look at the Gutenberg Bible. By the way, there is one. If you're down in Bloomington, you can see one at the what they call the Lilly Rare Books Library. That is, if you're familiar with the Bloomington campus, it's one of the three buildings that faces the Showalter Fountain, which is in front of in front of the auditorium, and it's that portion of campus. The Rare Books Library is, I'm going to say, on the south side of the fountain. Anyway, doesn't matter, but you can go in and see one, and if you look at it, you'll see how wonderful it still looks, really, for being so old. The Bible has a very dark, very good contrasty type. It's difficult for us to read. For starters, of course, it's in German, but beyond that, the typeface itself is even as important as it was not particularly readable for most people, I think. And so that's why we have other typefaces now. Black letter is not used at all in extended sections of type. So, but also then you can see that also they went through and there was color added. Now this may have gone through the press a second time with a color on it, and added, or it could have been sent through. I think the type in particular would have been, where you've got red type. And then you also have perhaps some of this may be hand illustration, but you can see that there was quite an ornate kind of book uh, and for the time, and he was able to produce 210 of them at the time, in the same time that it, would have taken a monk to maybe get halfway done with one. By the way, the pictures that are within the letters are often referred to, they're within the capital letters there. They're often referred to as illuminations. And again, we have that reference back to light, shedding light, creating, maybe an image that helps to illuminate or clarify a concept that's in there. We also have the industrial era of type, which was the 18th and 19th century. The kind of an artistic period from the 19th and 20th centuries, which was when type started to be used as a type of expression. You look at the type that is kind of all the different types of type that are in that box to the right. You can see that all of these different typefaces express a certain kind of feeling or emotion. And from the late 20th century, starting in the 70s, actually, you started having electronic typesetting, photo typesetting, and you had the ability to specify and set type without having to actually pick up little pieces of type. I took shop class when I was in ninth grade, and we used what they used to call the California job case, which was actually two sort of drawers that contained little sections, little pigeonhole type things, and each pigeonhole had a different letter in it. So if you wanted to get a typeface, you got the capital letters, and you got the lowercase letters, and you pulled the letters one at a time into a holder that eventually went onto a press, and then you could print from it. And you had the capital letters were up above. You learned how to do it this way so that people could do it quickly. You would select type from the uppercase, and then you could pull the small letters from the lowercase. So that's where that terminology comes from. We call it uppercase, lowercase, because of the fact that you used to have to grab the type from those drawers when you set type. This is back in the early days. Hot type was also was a technology that came along where they used a machine called a linotype machine. That's the most well-known thing. And this was they had letters that were made out of lead, and they were put together in in a large large frame, and then eventually that became a printing plate. But the lead was melted and reused. Every newspaper in the world used a linotype machine, which is a mechanized way of managing the melted lead and forming it into a line of type, or as we would say, a linotype. Cold type is computer generated. That's what we do pretty much now. There's very little, if any, use of a linotype machine, and it uses film, in other words, photographic film, to set type. It's photo typesetting, and the film then transfers to make a plate. Plates, usually for printing, are usually some kind of metal with something on top that holds the ink and creates the images. Digital printing is what we would think of as like a laser printer or even an inkjet printer, and that is part of something that came along, and they started calling it desktop publishing, which really I don't think ever took off in the way that they thought it would, but it became something where you could print large quantities if you wanted to on using digital technology. The technology is still there, but for larger quantities of items, say if you got to print something 500 of something, you're usually going to maybe send it to a regular printer. It just depends. Periodic table of typefaces. This is kind of just sort of for fun. Okay. There are about 40,000 typefaces out there, and there's probably more than that now because this number is a little bit old, but there's 176,000 different variations. And when you talk about the variations, you talk about, say, Helvetica, Helvetica Narrow, Helvetica Ultra Narrow, maybe wide, ultra wide, bold, that kind of, those are the variations on those things. There really are only about 3,000 typefaces that are actually used regularly today, and even that's kind of a lot. Black letter, let's look at typeface families. Black letter includes the old style, Gothic. It's the one that, this is also Old English. That for a while it was popular to put this in, to have your name in these letters on the back of your car window. At least with some people, it was seemed to be a good idea. It was never terribly readable, but because they didn't use the lowercase letters, they only used the uppercase, so almost impossible. So black letter, but it's fun for certain kinds of headlines. You might use it for a horror movie title, perhaps, and you might see it there, especially Dracula movies, that kind of thing. Roman typefaces came along. You have the old style, which has the fat serifs, right? Remember this. Transitional, which has sort of middle-sized serifs and a little more contrast between the thick and thin strokes. And then modern, which is where I think we're kind of, we may be in the modern or transitional. I think this is more of a modern, which has very thin serifs. You can see those serifs. There's a case made for serifs that they actually aid readability because they create like little kind of horizontal lines visually that help us stay on the line of text. And there's others who say there's no proof of that whatsoever. So Roman faces tend to be the most common. They're easy to read. They're used in books, magazines, newspapers, and so is sans serif. But the Roman faces are what you will very often find in term papers, things like that. It just kind of depends, and a lot of this is a matter of taste at this point. But okay. You have script faces, and these are also those perfume types that we talked about they talked about in that video. You use them for invitations. They are not. They're not calligraphy, but they have maybe some similarities to calligraphy. But they are used for very short, obviously short lines of text. You would never make this the primary text for an article, for example. Then you have what we call miscellaneous typefaces, novelty faces, display type, advertising. Did we talk about sans serif? Yeah, these are all novelty typefaces. The sans serif is, well, we'll get to that. So these are, one of the things to remember, you never mix a whole bunch of them. You can tell that too many typefaces, especially of these goofy ones, can kill readability, and some of them this is ugly and dated. This one here, the one that says downright ugly and dated, is called Neon, and it was used a lot in the 70s. I used to do advertising for RV companies, and some of them used this, and it was pretty darned ugly. There was also a rock and roll magazine that came out at the time that had that used this as its masthead, which is okay because it was called I Magazine, EYE, and so the text was not overly used other than for that, so it worked okay. But it's definitely outdated. It says late 60s, early 70s, basically, or even to late 70s. But it was really overused at the time. Square serif or slab serif, or what we call Egyptian, as you saw in the video, has really fat serifs and fat letters. I mean, and it's really well used it's good for headlines and things like that, especially. If you look here, oops, back up. You look on this particular slide, when you look at the typeface, you see the I and the J. There's not any separation there, so that's something that you would want to create some spacing there. And we'll talk about what that spacing is in a minute. But you can tell actually with the UVW X, Y even, they're too close together, so their readability is sacrificed because you can't make the distinction as easily. Serif typefaces are the cross lines at ends of serifs are the cross lines at the ends of letters. You have those on Times New Roman, Courier, New, all those things. Sans serif is cleaner, more contemporary looking. You got Arial, Tahoma, Century Gothic, Helvetica. Let's see, Calibri, I think, is one that you might have on your Windows machine, or I have them on my Mac too. That's another one that's out there. Basically it means there's no serif. Sans means without. So you have serif faces and sans serif faces. So it's pretty easy to follow. Okay, so we've got some videos about Helvetica. I think these links are out of date at this point. I do not believe we can get to these videos, so I'm going to switch. But that is Helvetica. So I'm going to go through here. These are really more discussion faces and discussion items, and I'm going to probably drop these into the discussion instead of trying to just talk about them here. But you can see what some of the besides the fact that they're promoting cigarette smoking as a health measure, these are kind of quaint ads, but they have they're worth doing some analysis in terms of what kind of typefaces are in these ads. So I'll drop these into the discussion section, and you can look at those. You can kind of this is a very distinctive period. The illustration, of course, is old-fashioned, but you've got a very looks like a hand-done typeface, really. Maybe a woodcut. This one is using several different typefaces. When we come forward in time, you start seeing more modern-looking advertisements. And even these now look sort of quaint, even if you don't know that these products, especially the Atari machine and the Mac, the old Mac, are old. They still have a period to them. In other words, they are of a certain time in our lives. It's late 70s, early 80s. This is 80s, early 80s. The Mac came out in 1984. This is Trajan, which I think they've got a video on Trajan here in a minute. So yes, we do. So there's typeface attributes. There is the font, which is the name of the font, which includes all the letters and numbers, and it also includes the attributes of a text. So you have, Bodoni bold, for example, is a typeface. Bodoni regular is also a font. So so you have really, some fonts have several versions of them, and then you also have the point size. Points are the standard of type sizings. 72 points in an inch. So if you have 72 points in a banner headline, that typeface is 1 inch high, basically. And I say basically because you will notice if you switch typefaces, you'll notice the sizes vary, even if you're staying to the same point size. And what it really refers to is the height of the ascending parts and the the parts going below, and so it's calculated in a way that I'm not going to go into, but you can basically say 72 points is 1-inch type. Okay, and they used to do really huge typefaces for things like the end of the World War II and Japan attacks and all that kind of stuff. They were like 2 and 3-inch type, and they some newspapers used to refer to that as the second coming font, which is indicates that's the kind of type you would use if Jesus came back and you needed to put it in the newspaper. So this is kind of fun. Let me see. I've got to make sure that this will run. I'm going to switch screens. Got a video for you here. And I need to back this guy up here to here.
Become a Goodie Bag fan on Facebook and you could win a copy of Font Book. Anybody else sick of all this Trajan? Everywhere I look nowadays, it's just Trajan, 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 Trajan. What is Trajan? Let me give you a hint. That's right, it's the movie font. Trajan is the movie font. Like indoor plumbing and toga parties, Trajan hails from Rome. Matter of fact, you can find almost 2,000-year-old inscriptions on Trajan's column, where they have totally off-the-leash keggers on Saturdays. In modern times, the typeface Trajan was meant to convey Roman epic movie. Then the Roman part faded away, then the epic, it just means movie now. You may have spotted Trajan here, or here, or here, or here, or here. Not here, 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 here. You get the point. Some movies escape Trajan in the theater and get stuck with it on DVD. Russell Crowe has co-starred with Trajan 3 times now. Every single horror film made in the past 5 years uses Trajan. Here's a fun idea. Next time you go to the video store, go one last time for old time's sake. Try playing the Trajan drinking game. So, movie graphic designers, this is hard for me to say, but I think we need a break. I think it's time to see other fonts. You've still got the floating heads. I know you love those floating heads. You've still got the big red fonts and the moronic comedies. Those are fun. Have a fling with Comic Sans. Just be sure to trash the files in the morning. And who knows, maybe in time you'll get to Kern Trajan's letter forms again. You know what I'm saying, bro? Yeah, I don't.
Okay. So go back to our other screen, and well, anyway, so you've got you get the idea with the Trajan font. That's a little bit out of date now, although I mean, because you referred to a video store, which and also just another point is you noticed it in several places here where they've made fun of Comic Sans, which was a font that Microsoft introduced when they created Windows, and a lot of people used it for a while, and then everybody started realizing that it was really not that great a font, and got sick of it. So it's it's okay for certain applications, I would say, but for the most part, no, it's not. It's just, but it probably gets a bad name because of it's become sort of the butt of a joke. But anyway. Look at it. Okay, typeface attributes. More typeface attributes besides the font and the size. Color is part of when we specify type. Most legible is being black on white, and I've also heard well, yellow on black is good. Now, when we talk about reverse type, that's down here at the bottom. We talk about reverse type being white on black, and that's actually there's ink everywhere except where you're letting the paper show through. Normally, colors do stand out on white paper, but when you reverse type, it tends to stand out very well. Yellow on black, which is not really reverse type, but generally, if you talk to designers, they'll talk about, the lighter color being reversed out of a darker color. It's not, and so you really have, it's two colors, but it's not, so it's not technically a reverse because you're not seeing the paper color. But normally when we talk about reverse type, it can be a lighter color out of a darker color. See here, you've got white reversed out of, oh, you got white reversed out of red here, for example, and that is true reverse type. This is reverse type. This is technically not, but I would refer to that as yellow reversed out of black very often. So that's that. So you have different kinds of ways of handling type on a page. This way, the way this is a book cover, the way this book cover is done is using a lot more ink than you would if it was just ink on white paper. So because you got to color the whole thing black and then come back, of course, then you have to come back and put the red in, for example, and then you have to put the yellow in, and very often those colors go down first, the black comes later, and there's just a lot of, there's a lot of messing around with different plates to make this work. But the black, that much black coverage on a page is going to use up a lot more ink than it would if you didn't do a reverse treatment. Okay, white space. White space is very important on any advertisement. It's really not part of the typography particularly, except that typography can help you achieve this. This is a business card. Now, a business card has, excuse me, business card has about has a very simple purpose to it, and that is to provide in a quickly readable form to someone that you just met your name, what you do, and how to get in touch with you. That's all a business card has to do. And if you but you will sometimes see business cards where they've jumbled it up with a whole lot of like product pictures and other things like that. But this is a good design because it provides, I'm John Smith, I'm the tennis pro. You can find, I'm sorry, this is not something I'm doing on purpose. It shows you the occupation of the person. It gives you their corporate identity, a logo, and it gives you an address, and then it gives you contact information, phone number, fax, email address, whatever has to be in there. And what's nice about this is that all these three things are easy to find. You don't have any problem. You don't have a lot of crap in between that says, okay, now where's this guy's name? You would have a harder time finding it if there was a lot more text or if there were a lot of pictures that are in the way, that kind of thing. So this is a very straightforward thing, and it does exactly what a business card is meant to do. And the white space helps separate those things so that you can find them. Okay, kerning. I'm going to talk about kerning just real quickly. Kerning you can do if you do it in InDesign. You can when you do if you are familiar with InDesign, you can change the space between the letters. Now, when they come right out of the box or right as you type them, very often letter spacing doesn't look quite right. We looked at that Egyptian where letters were too close together. Well, kerning is both it's the space between the letters, and it's also the act of kerning, of making the space. So it's sort of a verb and a noun. But you look at this up here on the right, you've got type that is kerned, that is not kerned at the top. So you have you actually, the spacing isn't right. In the word "to" is the one that's most likely the culprit. Use automatic kerning. Then you have then it brings it in together a little bit more. You can see where the O and the T and "to" are a little closer together. The one above, they look like they may not even be the same word. You can kern too tight, which means that you've got letters that are just a little too snug. You might, if you're not haven't got your glasses on, for example, you might see that KERN as KEM. So that's one of those R's and N's and M's are things that need to be looked at especially. Tight manual kerning, that's done manually, not with what a machine might do automatically. On the down below, the bottom one is tight kerning, but it's all readable. And so a lot of times, and they don't do this in all the text usually, but designers will go in, and especially on headlines, they will spend some time adjusting the spacing or the kerning between the letters in a headline. It can be very, very important to making a headline readable. All right. When we look at pages of text, you have something called leading, and the word leading goes back to when you set hand typeset in your, remember that California job case, you set type by hand, then you would put down a line of type, okay, and then you might put a little piece a piece of lead, a lead spacer between the lines. And those lead spacers were of different heights. They're 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, so that when you put text together, then you would create this spacing. You look at the paragraph on the left in this slide, and it's still too tight. The one on the next one over looks pretty good. The next one over also is very readable. And then you can also create a more of a airy look, is even more open to the right. Now you can go too far with this, obviously, but and you can also use leading to essentially fill the space in an area on a page too, if you want to do that in terms of making the page look balanced. So there's a lot of reasons for leading. The primary one has to do with readability, and then you can also have have other design considerations as well. The alley is a space between the columns. Okay, so you've got columns of type, 2 columns of type. And one of the reasons we have columns of type in magazines or in newspapers is because long lines of text that go, what the newspaper is, 10 inches across. Text that goes that long gets very tiresome to read, and it's hard to follow. And they found that if they do short lengths of text, that it is more readable. So this is all part of that science. So we have columns, and then you put space between the columns, and that space is usually measured in something called picas, but you won't need to remember that. But that is the measure. But that the space between the columns is known as the alley. So that's just something you need to know. Now, the gutter is sort of the space between pages, and this gets adjusted based on the binding. If you have text that's too close to the center, for example, on a spread, then some of that text kind of runs down into that crack where the which is the gutter, and becomes harder to read. You got to kind of turn the page, tilt the page a little bit to see it. So depending on whether you've got the type of binding you have on a book or magazine, they'll add some space enough so that you don't tend to lose part of that text, because you get really tired of having to dive down into the gutter to read the text. They try not to put much text in the gutter. Magazines tend to lay kind of flat, so it's less of an issue. But a lot of books, especially paper-bound books with like that flat back on them, will have that problem. Capitalization, uppercase versus lowercase. Copy in all caps is usually hard to read over an extended period of time. It's also, you're not supposed to do it in text messages and things. It looks like you're shouting. People have decided that's what that means. It doesn't really mean that. You're not necessarily actually shouting, but in a serif font, especially, it's hard to read caps over an extended period of time. So it's not used in regular text usually. Headlines, fine. Text is used as part of logos very regularly, and you can kind of see this is sort of this actually on the lower right is the evolution of the Google logo, and it really doesn't include the present anymore. The present logo is a sans serif, but all of these logos are highly recognizable. That's called branding. And then, of course, we have text as art itself. Here we're using text to create an artistic expression. It makes it pleasing to look at. And of course, you know, the way this text is presented makes it, you know, gives us a strong feeling of joy and rejoicing, etc. It fits that message. Okay. I want to see if this is actually going to come up. Okay. Oh, this is kind of a fun video. There's a link to that. You're not seeing it right now, but I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna do. I will put this in as a link in the discussion. I'm not gonna play it right now. There's some fun uses of text in as art, and that's what this Typolution video is as well. It's very well done, by the way. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so typography is to writing as soundtracks are to movies, and that is a fact. Now we're going to talk about comics, but I'm going to also, but I need to backtrack to informational graphics. So that's the next thing that's coming up here. So I'm going to post this, and you will have another video this week as well. So I don't know if I'll get to it today, today being Thursday, but I will get to it over the next day or so. This is becoming, as I've said, I've got a problem. My father's in the hospital and not doing well, and so I'm having to deal with some of that. But I wanted to get this up for you to be able to view now. So here it is, and I will see you soon. Let me know if you have any issues with the portfolio. I think I've already said that in any number of ways. And then also be sure this will go up today, but you have until midnight Thursday to see the to finish the exam. I'm sorry, not to see anything, but to finish the exam.